Hello and welcome to my video for episode 3 of Green Planet Seasonal Worlds. So I don't know when this is going to go out, but you can use the new haircut and the moustache to work out where this fits in the chronology, so enjoy that. This episode, as the title would suggest, talks about plants in the seasonal parts of the world, and this episode basically follows the seasons from winter to winter throughout a year, obviously with some tangents along the way. We open up in the boreal forest, which is basically completely encased in snow. This is probably the most dead forest in the world. Because there's so little room for growth, the forest is kind of stunted, and Amber appears to use it as a good example to discuss how seasons actually work. And the first major bit of footage we get involves the sugar maple in Canada. Here we see that obviously when spring comes, all this sap is generated within the tree to promote the growth of leaves, and we get a good look at how leaves actually work. Stomata, that's discussed, and we get a good microscopic view of stomata. It's really cool. Again, this series does a good job of talking about things that you'd learn in high school biology and showing you in pretty good detail. I thought that was pretty cool. And while the sap is getting generated, it attracts predators like the sapsucker, a bird that looks a bit like a woodpecker, and if this sapsucker is left unchecked and he manages to drill loads of holes around the tree, it will eventually die. However, there's loads of other animals like insects, hummingbirds that come in to also feed on the sap, which causes the sapsucker to chase them away, distracting it, allowing the tree to still grow and allowing everyone else to get a meal. It's a pretty good symbiotic world, and it was quite good. It's good lead into the rest of the episode. And then we had another kind of race for dominance among the plants, this time set in what looked like the British countryside, and it talked about plants that I'm kind of familiar with, things like nettles, brambles, stuff like that. I spend quite a lot of time working outside, and I can say that nettles and particularly brambles are a massive pain in the arse, so I was not on their side, and between them all they're able to monopolise the sunlight. However, there is Dodder. So Dodder is portrayed as a very malevolent predator, probably the worst one we've seen in this series, and again this series does a good job of adding personality to the plants, which I think they need to do. We see it wrapping around the nettles, penetrating it and then extracting its nutrients, which allows the Dodder to grow at a very rapid rate and kind of conquer most of the surrounding plants, which seems like a really bad thing. However, when caterpillars come, the nettles and the brambles and other plants are able to use the Dodder as a way of sending chemical messages to each other, to warn each other, and to spread toxins around to deter the caterpillars. So while the Dodder is seen as a pretty bad thing at the start, by the end you're like, okay, it's a necessary part of the whole matrix, how things work. So it was actually quite good. So I thought that was very interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this episode. I think this might be the most interesting episode we've had, I think. So that was quite good. And then we kind of talk about flowers for a bit. Flowers obviously a pretty important part of any plant. In the seasonal world, flowers are, pretty prevalent in the summer and spring. This episode does a good job of focusing on the types of plants that you'd see in different seasons, I think, throughout the episode. So it works on a narrative level as well. And we talk about how flowers are really hot compared to the surrounding area, which is good for attracting insects. We focus quite a lot on the hammer orchid in Australia, a plant that doesn't look like a flower. It's not very appealing. However, it does appeal to a specific species of wasp because the flower looks just like a female. It also generates the same pheromones a female would. So the males are coming over, and we see loads of males just attacking this plant, trying to mate with it. A similar thing popped up in Private Life of Plants. I don't think it was the exact same species, but it was probably a similar one. It was probably an orchid, and it kind of harkened back to that. And that was pretty cool. I liked that. It was probably the funniest sequence in the episode, if you could kind of call it that. And ultimately, the wasps get bored of the plant, go off and mate with actual females, which is good. So, it works for everyone. And we go to South Africa, to the Finbows region, which is a pretty important region. I think it's what I certainly think of when I think of flowering plants. And kind of that part of South Africa, where the garden route is pretty famous for its flowers. So I think it's good that they talked about that in this episode. And we talk about bushfires, so they come in and just basically decimate the whole area. Everything dies. It's a pretty barren landscape, but that's great for the fire lily. This plant that lies dormant for 16 years on end and will only emerge in certain bushfires. It emerges and it's able to get enough sunlight, and it's able to exploit all the nutrients that's left by the other plants that obviously are dead. And when the other plants start to regenerate and start to reclaim the nutrients, it disappears back into the ground to lie dormant for another 16 or however many years. It's kind of a almost romanticised part of the episode. The music's very romantic, I think. There's a sort of weird beauty in that sequence, I think, that I can't quite put my finger on why it works, but it just does. I think it's a pretty good part of the episode. Again, there's a lot of good stuff in here. And then we move on to talk about seeds. We focus mainly on dandelion. They're obviously a pretty iconic plant in the Northern Hemisphere. And we talk about how they're attacked by harvest mice. The harvest mice, which are obviously a cute little mouse, are portrayed as like a voracious predator, which is quite fun. Again, it's funny, but it also adds dimensions because it shows you the plant's perspective that, a harvest mice is a pretty bad thing for a dandelion. And we see obviously the wind comes in and spreads all the seeds around. It's nice. It doesn't go on for too long, but it's quite cool. We see other plants and their mechanisms of spreading their seeds. There's that one plant, I can't remember the name of, it's like a cucumber, that basically Amber touches it and it just propels and squirts out the seeds everywhere. That's quite funny. Himalayan balsam as well, it's kind of like a slingshot method. Quite fun as well. The best one was Ceratocarium from South Africa again. Here we see its seeds look just like antelope droppings, which are obviously really appealing to dung beetles, which then take their seeds and roll them up and bury them like they would droppings. And that's quite fun. It was again another little fun sequence. Again, this episode has used a lot of very weird examples for pollinators and other animals that are useful in assisting the plants, like kinkages in the first episode, dung beetles here, a lot of weird ones in there. I've appreciated that. I think that's quite good. And as we get into autumn, we start seeing that it's that time of year where the plants are kind of getting ready to go into hibernation, to go into dormancy. They shed their leaves, and that creates a lot of nutrients in the ground, which is great for fungi. And this episode did a great job of talking about fungi. Not only have we seen the mushrooms, we spend a bit of time there. Mushrooms are pretty, iconic things, especially these kind of mushrooms. But we use that as a springboard to talk about the mycorrhizal network, which is a really cool thing, a really important thing, and it's something you do see sometimes. It's been talked about in recent series, but did a really good job of showing you the interconnectedness of all the trees underground. We talk about how the fungi connects all the trees, all the plants in the forest, and they're able to communicate through the fungus. And they highlight the areas where the mycorrhiza actually are underneath the trees to show you an interconnected web throughout the forest. And this is used to further anthropomorphize the plants themselves, talking about how the trees are able to communicate with each other, sometimes to harm each other, sometimes to steal nutrients, sometimes to provide nutrients. Sometimes plants will actually recognize their own offspring and provide nutrients just to them. Sometimes dying plants will give up their nutrients to their neighbours. It's really good. It portrays a sort of utopian world among the forest, which realistically isn't really there in real life. But it's an interesting narrative. Well, it isn't exactly like what's happening. There's a bit of, truth in there, I think. Probably the best part of the episode for me. It's the most interesting part. I did know about the mycorrhizal network going into this series, but it added so much more to it, and I think it was really good. And then we kind of get into winter. We see it's pretty devastating for some plants. Some plants are able to, lock away their nutrients and, just ride out the winter. Others aren't so lucky. Frost comes in and ruptures the stems of kind of smaller plants, and we see all these weird frost flowers emerge. I've never seen that before, but they look really cool, really haunting, and there was something really cool about that. I thought that was a pretty good part of the episode. It doesn't go on too long. Winter is definitely the part of the episode we focus on the least, but it is the point of the year where plants are least active, so that does make sense. And then we end the episode talking about sequoia. The seasonal episode, seasonal parts of the world, sequoia are probably the most iconic plants. They're the biggest, certainly, the biggest organisms on Earth. Pretty cool to talk about. And we talk about how they're not doing too well with climate change. Obviously, all these plants we've seen rely on seasons to be reliable. Climate change is throwing that off. The seasons, while they're still there, aren't as clear-cut anymore. I mean, you see right now, we get really long springs and summers, short autumns, I sometimes no autumn at all, longer winters, snow comes in weird times of years. It is a thing. And plants are the ones that are affected first. And I think this did a really good job of talking about something that's so big and so massive, and it's kind of humbling to think that it's affected as well. So yeah, it was cool seeing the sequoias, and it was even more cool to use them in a pretty emotional part of the episode. I thought that was pretty good. And then we get the diaries. It's all about the people filming the fire lily, but they use that to kind of reiterate what we've just said with the sequoias, how it was actually quite hard to film a lot of these sequences because the seasons are so erratic. That was quite interesting. And then looking for the fire lily was quite good. They got a good sense of how destructive the fires were. I thought that was a pretty good sequence. So yeah, this episode is really good. I think this might be the best one of the series so far. I think it's a pretty good episode. Highlights for me at the mycorrhizal network, but I also like pretty much everything else in the episode. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this episode. What were your highlights? Let me know. I'll be doing the next one at some point. Don't know when, but I'll do it. And yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.